Hey, Diva family. I just want to give a heads up that this episode contains a description of sexual assault. And if you would find this challenging, you might want to skip this episode. Thanks for taking care of yourself. All right, I'll see you next time. Welcome to episode 23, Diva family. Today we're doing a deep dive into the world of ethics with my guest, Sandra Dreisbach. I first met Sandra during the pandemic when we were all hanging out on the Clubhouse app, chatting psychedelics. And I admired her perspective and what she had to say, and I trusted her voice. And I've since learned more about her through different workshops and programs, and I believe she's really doing important work, shining a light on an incredibly important aspect of the psychedelic space, which is often overlooked or just given lip service. So let me tell you about Sandra's background before we dive in. Sandra is an ethicist and psychedelic ethics specialist with an MA, PhD in philosophy. She's an ethics leader active in psychedelic integration, education, and advocacy. Sandra is the leader of EPIC, Ethical Psychedelic International Community, former ethics advisor for Nectara, a psychedelic support ecosystem, ethics director for World Psychedelics Day, and former leader of the Santa Cruz Psychedelic Society. Sandra taught bioethics at University of California, Santa Cruz for 10 years, and she worked for many years in the tech industry, primarily at Apple. She's also the host of the Psychedelic Source podcast. Sandra, thanks for coming on Psychedelic Divas. It's such a pleasure to see you again.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Carla. It feels like a sort of reunion of sorts after our Clubhouse days,
Exactly. Yes.
Except with video now. For those
with
of
video, yes, it's a much. It's
Audio
for those
and
of you
video.
for those of you watching on YouTube. Yes, there's video available.
Fair enough.
You want to see what we look like in real life Clubhouse people.
We're real. We're not AI.
Exactly. So let's get started with a little bit of your background. I am curious, how does one turn a PhD in philosophy into being an expert on ethics in the psychedelic realm?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I mean, because in some ways that isn't what happened, right? I had a relationship with psychedelics and plant medicines before I got my degrees. And so, but in terms of how I grew up in the Silicon Valley, you may understand because you're in the Bay Area, I kind of joke sometimes it was in the water, right? Like I first kind of, it wasn't a voluntary or conscious sitting situation, but like my boyfriend when I was 15, was got high on LSD and all these other things. And I was like involuntarily like sitting him at his junior prom when I was 15. Right. And that was my, some of my introduction. Right. So for me, it was always in the background, always around, even when I was working at Apple. Steve Jobs, famously talked about his experiences and how it helped him and shift consciousness. And in that sense, even when I got my degree and PhD in philosophy, it's focused on ethics. So really, it's more of a question of why hadn't it happened yet? Why hadn't I made the connection? And for me, I was always very oriented towards service from a very young age. I'm even a literal Girl Scout.
I was a Girl Scout.
I got to the silver award, got to the
I don't know what that is. I just sold a bunch of cookies.
It's basically to do a certain amount of volunteer hours, and then and that's the second highest award in Girl Scouts. I can't believe I'm talking about this.
I don't think I got there.
My best friend actually got the highest award, which you can only get by saving someone's life.
Okay.
And I'm just saying this all because like it even took me a while to even embrace ethics and being into ethics, even though I was always focused on service and that was part of my spiritual practice as well. And there was a catalyst moment when I was teaching at UC Santa Cruz where a student who reached out to me for, I thought it was just going to be for like a letter of recommendation or something like that. No, truth. And they're like, hey, can you meet with me? I think you can help me. It was all via text. And I'm like, sure, I'm about to go to class. And she shows up before class and meets with me, and she's in an altered state. And to me, it's like all of a sudden my worlds are converging, right? Like there was no separation between my work, quote unquote, work life and my psychedelic life and my spiritual work, and which included tarot and doing readings and intuitive work. And she was she also was in a state of looping. I don't know how far we want to go into this story, but and here's your trigger warning for your audience. But long story short, she got sexually assaulted while on the substance. Was given a substance that she didn't know what it was by someone on
Mm-hmm.
campus, and that's what she needed help with.
Yeah.
And and people didn't know about, I didn't talk about my experiences at all to my students, for what it's worth, for anyone out there at UCC. Like, I must, like, I don't know whether I just looked the type or whether I just looked like I was loving, supportive, or regardless, she came to me and we talked to the on-site therapist. We brought the police on there. She was looping on trying to identify the person who had done this to her, of course. I can at least report that she did file a case report, and I was there for the early parts of her integration and was there when she told her story. And that experience made me realize that we could do better. First of all, it's like, as a UCSC, I mean, and I'm not criticizing anything that they did per se. It's just that they weren't informed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then also for me, I felt convicted. Like, here I was at UC Santa Cruz, infamous, has this huge association with psychedelics. We knew people doing psychedelics. I mean, that same boyfriend, by the way, went to UCSC, and he definitely had a lot more, it's a lot more tamer now. And I'll give respect to my alma mater, but but convicted in the sense that, like, how is it that I'm not talking about this? I was open to talking about a lot of different subjects. I was teaching bioethics, which would be the appropriate place to discuss it, and that experience of serving a former student in that moment is what made me look at showing up more actively as an advocate, and to bring my ethics expertise to the psychedelic space. And it first started with just my own classroom,
Right.
and then expanded out from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I certainly have my thoughts on this, but you're the expert, so I want to hear your thoughts on what makes ethics so important when it comes to psychedelics.
Well, I mean, for me, ethics is about living well,
Okay.
right? And if we care about living well and we want, at the end of the journey per se, not the journey never ends truly, but we want to have our lives be improved and be supported by it. Even if we're looking at just recreational, I don't think it's just, right? That psychedelics, and it to be in good and proper relationship with them, or plant medicines or altered states, that we need to learn how to live well with them in
Mm-hmm.
relationship. And so to me, it's, I mean, like, I'm choking on my own words trying to even get it out. But part of it's just like, I can't imagine not thinking about it. And that was actually my biggest shock coming into greater community consciously, and advocacy and community, and talking about it, was realizing how little conversation there was.
Yes.
And I was shocked. I was shocked. I was actually trying to convince people why it was important. So
Well, I do like this definition though of living well,
yes.
because it doesn't feel, because I think, I mean, maybe this is some of my perspective, maybe some of the listeners might share it. Ethics seems sort of like by the book, or there's, a lot of rules and guidelines and, everything's, and I just like the simplicity of it's living well. It's within, and I also think, for me personally, I think ethics, a lot of people conflate ethics with morality.
Mhm.
And I think things get confusing when that happens. Uh,
Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
people absolutely have different moral standards, but I think, as a people, we want to have, you know very very aligned ethical standards.
Well, and I think that's a baggage that we have of trauma as a society, that we have from a Western global North perspective on what the role of ethics is. It
Hmm.
was used as a place of judgment, as a justification for harm, just like a lot of
Hmm.
religions and spiritual practices have been used for harm. And I think that our relationship with ethics, and with, our own relationship in society to each other, and what it means to support each other, and what it means to live well, and what it means to have a life of meaning and value, is starting to come into greater healing and receptivity to why we have that association with judgment, moral judgment, right? And criticism.
Yes, that moral judgment when you put
Yeah.
the moral before it, because I think I think ethics is sort of a lot, it's just cleaner. Judgment is a cleaner thing, especially when we're talking within the judiciary, right? We're trying to
Mm.
have, justice is blind, right? The concept of that at least. But then you put moral judgment before it, and it's like, well, whose morals?
Well, and I think that's an excellent question, right? Whose morals? Whose standard? Whose rule stick? Literally,
I think that's what we're fighting about right now in this country.
oh, I mean, in more ways than one. And I think well, and I believe as within, so without, as above, so below, right? So, it's only a reflection of what internally is also happening within all of us in terms
Hmm.
of realizing a lot of the things that we grew up with are not actually supported for us.
Yeah. Well, you shared with me when we spoke earlier that you have in the past served as a psychedelic guide, and now you are the leader of Epic, and Epic came out of the underground. So, can you talk about the difficulties of trying to introduce ethics into a world where there is no structure and most of the work is kept in the shadows? I mean, for example, there's no formal reporting structure, and my understanding and belief is that many clients would choose not to report their facilitator because it could mean legal trouble for them. So, or for the the person themselves, like because both people were doing something that was illegal. So my question is, how does one introduce an ethical standard into such an unstructured world?
Well, in some ways, it's the same answer to the last one, right? That, you cannot rely on the world to establish our own standards of living.
Hmm.
And for me, at least, part of the psychedelic or plant medicine or healing journey is to come up with that for ourselves, to come into alignment with our highest expression of ourselves, what our values are, what is our authentic expression of who we are, being able to be honest and not feel like we have to conceal any aspect of us. And I think that in the psychedelic space in particular, just to be more specific, it's actually has a literal double-edged sword. One is the sword of the fact that we desperately, actually, the desire is there, that there's actually a strong drive in the psychedelic community, liberally spoken psychedelic community, that to do things better, to have indigenous reciprocity, for example, or to be inclusive of, and more, and take down the barriers around BIPOC, or whether it's even like the shadow aspects of our society, or, this whole full range is or just simple environmental care and caring for the earth and being in greater relationship. And so there's a strong drive for those things, right? And to the point that people even have a cancel culture around it. Right? I mean, there's cancel culture out there anyway, independent of psychedelic space, but even more so, I think, in psychedelic space. So the judgment is actually really, really strong. And yet on the other side, the way to create accountability is very, very limited,
Right.
incredibly limited, more limited than I'd say in many other spaces.
Yeah.
And then and then those are the two edges, right? The edges of feeling like, because of criminalization in most of the world, most people are afraid to be open and honest about what practices they're doing. And if there is harm that occurs, there's less avenues of support. Although a lot of the laws that are violated outside of whether or not you're using a substance or not, right? Like causing sexual harm,
Hmm.
financial abuse or harm. A lot of these things are already harassment. Like all these things are illegal anyway. And there's also this trope of let's not harm the movement.
Oh, I think that that has done so much damage.
Yeah, it's so really
And
toxic.
I understand that. I mean, because
Yeah,
it's been so hard, and we're people have worked so hard to get to the place, and then it's like, but you don't harm the movement, don't speak, don't. It can't. That's not how it wants to come above ground.
I agree with you. I agree. And interesting enough, like one of the things that motivated the people of Ethnic to come together was this idea of like, well, is there a way we could help facilitate reporting, even if it's amongst
Hmm.
communities, and help coordinate that and
Uh-huh.
share it? And not from a place of judgment, but in a place of actually community support and
Mhm.
alignment, right? Because for those who may not know, right, the same perpetrator, for example, or who's accused, alleged perpetrator, right? Because we're not a criminal justice system. We're not, uh, but they will go to country and place to
Mhm.
place, sometimes with the same name, sometimes with a different name. And
Mhm.
it also creates this unique challenge in the psychedelic space because there's a lot more travel.
Mhm.
So people will try and go abroad to try and do it more legally
Mhm.
and or to try and seek out, like, for instance, a shamanistic or traditional medicinal healer, roadman, whomever, to be able to support them within legal bounds. And then the harm will occur somewhere else, and then they'll come back to their origin, right? Um, and still dealing with that and
Wait,
needing
I'm sorry, what do you
support.
mean by that? The harm will occur somewhere else.
Well, it can occur anywhere, right? I
Right.
mean, like,
Of
it can,
course.
and I'm not even, I know obviously that there are activities here in the United States. I'm not going to say that I don't know that, but I mean the sense of like harm occurs all across the board, and like, I mean, like, I've even been exposed to like a Bay Area list that someone else created, not me, by the way, that's passed around, right? Or there's
Wait,
some.
and that list says these are not good people then, or I don't, what is the
It
list?
lists their names, and it lists the farms that they've been accused of,
I
and
see.
it lists the, and like, you could say it's basically a blacklist, right?
Got it. Okay.
And there are informal ones and informal ones, and people get kicked out of groups, and people spread words, right? Around about people, and people's reputations mean a lot in this space.
Hmm.
Uh, so, but
And so you may not even, as a facilitator or a guide or group leader, may not even know they're on this blacklist.
they may
They
not.
might they might have been placed on there by somebody who was jealous.
Yeah. It could have been
Uh,
totally inappropriate. It could be false
right.
accusations, which I think is a really important thing for people to recognize.
Hmm.
I would say, the vast majority of accusations of harm are true,
Hmm.
but we need to hold space for the fact that some of them aren't going to be true, which is
Hmm.
like back to like that principle of like innocent until proven guilty
Right.
type of
Yes.
idea, that real justice. And this gets us back to ethics again. Like,
Hmm.
why do we care about being just, or about reporting harms, or about having safe spaces?
Hmm.
It's because we believe that all deserve to be safe and supported. Our execution of that and what we think that means is really different. And
Right.
and I think something else I want to add here, some another unique complexity for psychedelic space is, when we're working towards, especially when there's work towards healing, there's a higher percentage of people who are seeking psychedelics and plant medicines out of desperate need.
Yes.
And you take a group of people, and I'm not saying that's everyone, right? It's totally not. But there's a lot of dissatisfaction with how the mental health in the West has been supporting or not fully supporting, whether it be through therapy or whether it be through medication, SSRIs. And a lot of people are driven to psychedelic and plant medicines as a possible solution. And you take that, so they're already vulnerable, right? Maybe they have chronic depression. Maybe, there's lots of different reasons. Maybe it's just a temporary situation. And then you compare that with the substances that are very powerful.
Hmm.
And so the power dynamics already at issue. And then you add something that gives people more power, more influence. It not only brings like the perfect victims potentials, and I'm not saying, I believe in survivor, right, orientation, but it also is attractive to people who would cause harm, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's a real truth that people in the space need to accept, as that it is not just risky in terms of the substance, it's not just risky in terms of whether it's legal or illegal. It's also in terms of what the power of the medicine to heal, can also has that same power to harm. And that's
Mm-hmm.
a different double edge. It's about creating deep respect for what you're working with and for the work itself and for what
Yes.
the change and transformation it is within you. And I
Right.
think only just beginning to understand how powerful and transformative these substances or spiritual work is.
Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please, go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Thanks.
So let's talk about the shadow.
Yeah.
You mentioned when we spoke earlier that you have learned a lot about the shadow from your work with ethics. So how do the two interact?
Well, it's interesting. I really appreciate this question because I was actually talking with Sam, who's one of the other members of Epic, who's been with me the whole time. And we were doing work together before Epic as well. And we realized that I'm like, gosh, I never considered ethics work as shadow work before.
Mm-hmm.
And part of our own integration and reflecting on our work and what we were doing, that part of what we were holding space even in a university classroom was for looking at the shadow and how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about harms, I mean, I don't like to be focusing on that mindset, but that's shadow. That's shadow. And if we're making people look at certain shadows of our work, it's going to make people uncomfortable to have that mirrored back. And it's an uncomfortable truth, and navigating just even an there's no just ethics classroom. Like, I've seen transformations occur through having these conversations around values, meaning, as you might expect, right? I even one of the things I did, I led this. We started what may be called an ethics debate team at UC Santa Cruz. I have a background in speech and debate. Maybe can't tell in this moment, but we would work on these cases and we would look at real cases, and all the students would be asked to come up with their own view of the case. And you didn't have to, unlike other forms of debate, you didn't have to disagree. You could
Mm-hmm.
actually agree with the other team.
Uh-huh.
But it
Okay.
was more about discussion and
Uh-huh.
exploration of your values and really looking at the issues and really engaging with things that people didn't want to talk about. And to me, that's sometimes what ethics does do. If you're really being genuine about this work, I feel you're really doing that inner work as well. And you can't separate out these questions about, why are we here? Why are we alive? What do you really value? What's really important to you? Because it's embedded into all of our practices.
Well, I think I mean, the shadow is well, it's always present, but it's one of those places that people. I think it's one of the things that people fear about doing a psychedelic
Mm,
journey because
yeah,
that's one of the the big concerns. Like I don't know what all what's gonna pop out from that I'm unaware of. So I think people have some fears about their psyche, things they've shoved down, things that like not
yeah,
being in control of
yeah.
keeping all that buttoned down, and that's certainly the shadow. I also think that a lot of people go into psychedelics these days, looking for the sparkle, rainbows, happy, happy, joy, joy,
The
and can
mystical
be
experience,
right,
that
and
is
then get
that
body
feeling of
slammed
awe. Yeah,
by most likely elements of their own shadow. And I think it's
right.
because it's a place that in the United States at least that we don't really explore. We don't there's I don't really I mean it's in literature, it's in movies, but it's not in our day-to-day culture. There's no classes. There's no I mean, you have to be diving into psychology class in order to
Which
even have that raised at all. It's just not something that we speak to our children about. To have an awareness that this is It's just it's a part of who we are. It's that rejected part of who we are, and wanting to bring it in with love and not reject it. And of course, if you can do that
Yeah,
in psychedelics, there's a beautiful healing opportunity. And if you reject it
absolutely.
again, it's gonna slap you upside the head.
It will, and I will say that where you do see it though is in our stories,
Hmm.
like Alice in Wonderland,
No, that's why I
right?
said it's in movies. It's
Right?
in yes,
And
it's in
it's
yeah.
there. It's
Hmm.
there, you know. And I know a lot of people are at least in the psychedelic space are akin and wise to Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, or
Yes.
in psychology, or the notion of archetypes,
Hmm.
right? Um, or even talking about chakras, right? But people don't appreciate, because it's like where our Western upbringing focused on wasn't on spiritual growth and transformation.
Right.
But it's there. It's there. Like I'm definitely a kid of the 70s and of the Star Wars generation. And I
Hmm.
remember reflecting back, I'm like, gosh, you know, was Yoda one of my earliest spiritual teachers, you know? Or my I love
Yeah.
of myth, you know, and short
Yeah.
stories of Greek gods and goddesses,
Uh-huh. Yes.
or Aesop's fables, when I look at the shadow of ethics, right? For myself, you know, look at those stories and the things that fascinated me back then about all of this. But I also want to acknowledge the golden shadow too, that I think sometimes we're also
Hmm.
afraid of who we can become.
Yes. Yes. The I think what some people would call our true selves, the true
Yeah,
manifestation of our soul, that light part that we came down here to, I think in my belief system, the soul comes down to play and to learn and to grow. And how do you learn and play and grow? Well, you face challenges,
that's
uh,
right. And that's
and then you
normal.
overcome
That's
them,
normal.
ideally.
And I think that's it. I think some of the things are like, you know, we hear some of the language now, at least because, you know, I hear it sometimes from the education that some of my kids are getting now, that growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Hmm.
And we were raised with more of a fixed mindset, and which fixed rules, right? But
Hmm.
if a
Yep.
growth mindset, especially if you think about nature, right? Transformation is who we are,
Hmm.
right? The acorn becomes the oak, you know, and it has everything it needs to become the oak, but it takes time. You don't plant it in the ground and yell at it because it hasn't become the oak tree yet. You know, it's like, well, and then it sprouted. It's like, why aren't you an oak? You know, and it has to burst out of the seed, right? And it has to change and transform. Like, it was literally underground and then burst up.
And it has to
Got
avoid all those squirrels.
right, all the squirrels. The squirrels who probably forgot that they planted it, you know. But this is just it, and I think that's one of the gifts I think the psychedelic space in the community is able to give back to the larger community, is this recognition of that we are that transformation is part of who we are, and embracing transformation, embracing the shadow, embracing that healing and transformation, and the fear is informative, it's supportive. It's not, you know, we're not trying to get rid of our fear. We're learning how to work with it, right? In relation.
Oh, right. No, I think a lot of people are trying to get rid of their fear.
I know. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not saying that there aren't people who are like, you know, and like, it actually reminds me of a psychedelic friend of mine who was a very, very experienced psychonaut. And he would just have this sort of like, it kind of has this sort of leap of faith moment, but it was, it's like, it was like an F it moment is what kind of what he would tell himself before he would do it. It's like, it's just, he would just say F it and just do it. You know, it's just kind of like
Right.
a, almost a little testosterone edge, I suppose, but like, but still, you know,
Whatever it takes to jump off the
whatever
cliff.
it takes. What does it take to jump off the ledge? You know, and maybe we don't talk enough about that part. You know, what does it take to have that leap of faith into the unknown?
This is a little off topic. I was raised, I think a lot of us were raised with that warning that, well, if everybody jumped off the bridge, would you? And so that was, of course, the answer was supposed to be no. And then later on, I think my mother said something like that to me, like as an adult. And I was like, well, actually, I would look down to see if they survived and had fun. And if they did, then yes, I would jump off the bridge.
Yeah, maybe.
I
Right?
mean,
You
I
know?
mean that's the whole point of bungee jumping, or that's the whole point of, like, okay, yes, it's no one hit the ledge below. I'm gonna jump off this little cliff and have fun. But that place of the parental, limitation, right, to keep you alive. there's so much of that instilled fear, of like, don't do that, don't do that. It's dangerous, it's dangerous. And so, by the time you come around to having that choice around, shall I do psychedelics or not? I think there's just an inherent amount of fear. I mean, and I'm not saying it's not. I think a healthy amount of fear is good. You don't know what you're stepping into. But it's anyway. We went sideways with
Well,
the fear
no, but I
conversation.
mean,
But
just to wrap up the fear conversation, I mean, at least for now, it's what's with us. But like, there's reasonable and unreasonable fear, right? And trying to strike that balance and that temperance, which actually is an ethics concept, right?
uh-huh.
Like, trying to find acknowledge where the fear is correct and acknowledge
Right.
where it's not.
Yeah.
Right. That it's a manufactured idea or a construct, right? And at least with psychedelics, a lot of it's a construct because of what our society, like I literally was in that just say no to drugs era. And it definitely affected me, and it definitely affected my choices around in my relationship.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And my integration clients, as I help them prepare for maybe their first experience, I tell them that fear, that's going to be natural and normal.
Yeah.
And and we set up all the things to look for to make sure that they are going to be in a safe, supportive environment and all of
That's
those
right.
things. But I think there's what's a very important distinction is like, yes, there's a certain amount of more like trepidation fear of like, okay, I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to step into this void, as opposed to this doesn't feel right. I don't know if I want to do this with these people or in this space.
That's right.
And then I think that's a big flag. That's a
No, I think that's an important,
yeah.
that's
a useful fear.
That's discernment, right? And that's why I feel like it's so important to not embrace fear, like F fear or anything like that,
Right.
but to listen. It's about listening,
Yeah.
and then discerning from what you're hearing. Right? And the same thing, like if the discomfort, right? Some people I've even talked with, like, well, we can't even listen to discomfort. Well, some of it's informative and some of it's not. And that's part of the process, right? And one of the challenges as well, I think, with psychedelics sometimes is that they give up too much of the control or the discernment over to whoever's facilitating for
Right.
them. And they're not, versus having an I really encourage people to focus on empowering people.
Yeah.
And supporting, their own discernment, and knowing that that's probably something that's going to happen to a lot of people who are seeking.
Well, can you share some stories that pose to ethical dilemmas that you've come across with your work in
There's so
Epic?
many.
And let us know what Epic did in those situations, or
What kind of flavor do you want?
well, what are the more sort of interesting, I guess, or like, like, anything particularly more unique or different? I mean, I mean, I hate to say it, but of course, I think we're all hopefully become aware of all the sexual abuse, ethical
Oh,
violations. So
yeah.
maybe let's not, we can skip those. I
We
think there's
can,
awareness of
no.
those.
Yeah, no. The more nuanced other
Right.
things happen. Well, here's one involving someone I supported, and they were a trained facilitator, worked for many years, had already got to their own healing and recovery process, and had their own conscious relationship with psychedelics and plant medicines. And their practice involved giving very intense experiences over a short duration of time. And when they decided to continue with some of their more, because I think something that's not talked about as much is like facilitators switching back and forth from supporting someone in an experience to having their own experiences, and how to have that relationship in a way that supports you in your process and your integration, while also being able to be present for your clients. And there can be a bleeding through those relationships. So for this person, they decided to use ibogaine, and had a challenge in their integration process that wasn't well supported. And they were debating, like, should I take even more medicine? And they're like, I hear that if I combine this substance and this substance, that that maybe that will be the difference. It was literally the same exact substance, but then adding more and giving more intensity. And what I reflected back was, you can say it's an ethics issue, right? Like I knew this person supported clients.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's someone who's telling me that they haven't fully integrated from their last experience.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're saying they're going to go into not only another experience, but a more intense one.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to empower people's decision making.
Mm-hmm.
But and you also don't want to cause too much undue influence. I feel like that's really important, right? So I present the options, I present the information. So for me, I'm like, well, let's look at what the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me that you're not fully integrated and that you had a challenging experience. And if we believe that you're still in the window, we would have to talk about like what I consider to be the integration window. But for ibogaine in particular, I feel it's a very large
Yes.
window. If you look at Gould Dolan's research,
Right. Yeah, the critical period is the longest
right,
with ibogaine.
yeah, it's about 6 months. And so, and like, well, it may be true that combination could be supportive for you, but given your history and given your practice, is that going to be the most supportive thing for you given where you are in that journey? And just, weigh it out for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to
Yeah.
cause, you're going to go into another deeper integration cycle while you haven't finished integrating the last.
Right.
And you know that you didn't have a positive experience, which is why you're here with me in this moment. Right. Right. And you also know, and something we'd already talked about, it's like, you have this pattern of going for very intense experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also how he worked.
Right.
So it's not, I wasn't trying to change his practice or
Mm-hmm.
or how he approached his work with the medicine.
Yeah.
But just presented to him the facts and reflected back what he was reporting back to me to help empower his choice. And he ended up deciding not to go through with another journey with the extra combo, supercharged, superhero, whatever, And he made
The testosterone trippers.
Yes. Some might have described, yeah, and I've definitely encountered actually like one of, and maybe this will be a good different. I'll give another flip side from facilitation when someone I facilitated on the same sort of edge of the
Mm-hmm.
the jumpers that you could call it. I don't want to necessarily marry it with hormones, but this was someone. This is many years ago now, but and they were from another country. Ironically, they felt more supported here. And yes, it was here that I did the supporting of the experience. And they wanted to do the quote unquote, I want a heroic journey.
Right.
I want to go like really dive deep and really go
Mm-hmm.
into the deep end and really
Mm-hmm.
transform and all this sort of stuff. And it was one of those cases where I'm reeling them back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, some people you're encouraging them to like explore and, maybe microdosing or other options or things like that. And this person was like, they were going to go all the way to the deep end. And I've had more than one person like this. And we worked through it and we talked about it. And, she gave permission to go for the larger amount.
Mm-hmm.
And I even talked to a mentor at the time. I'm like, what do you think? Because this is one of those rare cases. I don't know about how other people have worked, but this is one of those cases where they were passed to me to support the experience
Mm-hmm.
versus I wasn't supporting the integration or the post, just what was around the experience, just like within a 3-day period I was supporting. And they seemed totally fine. Like actually, they even said, which I would correct now, but they said to me at the time, like, well, they need to get their money's worth. And I'm like,
oh, yes.
okay.
Yes.
In terms of an ethics issue, right?
Okay.
Like there's some pressure around that because it is expensive
Mm-hmm.
and there's risk too. So if you want to reduce the risk and that step, this is sort of like, while I appreciate that, I feel like we need to hold space for the no.
Mm-hmm.
Consent can always be revoked, everyone. So instead, she and I agreed to do a small tiering within the experience. So starting with a lower amount and then checking in at about 45 minutes to an hour. And then seeing if that was still her intention to go the full
Mm-hmm.
distance after feeling into it, because this is someone who hadn't had any. And to me, I'm like, you're not doing it from an informed lens. That's what
Right,
I'm like. I know
exactly.
you're not informed. I know you don't
Right,
know what the
right.
experience is. Yeah, I know you don't know what you're saying.
Right.
And I'm not saying people shouldn't be able to make choices when they don't know what the experience is going to be like. But this is part of the role of the facilitator, right? I'm like, well, let's temper it. Let's, do this. And like, I'll still let you do the full jump, but you do it under these sort of conditions for my boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And she met them and she did it. And I think for her, it was the right choice,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yes.
Um, I think also what came up, and that was my own discomfort because I'm not that type of person.
Right.
Right. And I think that's
Interesting. Yes.
also important to talk about too, is like, I don't think we were the wrong fit. I think we were the right fit because we tempered each other.
Right. No,
Right.
exactly. And I think that was actually a really it really makes sense for somebody who's new who comes in, especially with like that got whatever Michael Pollan vision or that they're
Yes.
trying to achieve, but to have some medicine on board and then ask the question, because now you're in the expanded state. You're at least had a handshake with the medicine, and now you're in the agreement is going to come from between the medicine and
Yeah.
the person, as opposed to like their vision of what it should be.
It's
And I think
from an
that's a great way
informed
of
space. It's
yeah,
from
an
an
informed
informed
space.
and
Yes.
and worth, and just from like the ethics perspective, just to make this really clear for people, like I generally would not, I consider you can say no, you can step down your consent,
Mm-hmm.
you can't
Mm-hmm.
step up your consent.
Right. Right.
And so like in this situation, she'd already given full consent,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And we had a previous agreement to start it slow and that she could.
Mm-hmm.
So was this within and I would say that was in some ways challenging because that navigating that kind of consent is different.
Yeah. Right.
I'll give you another example if you
Okay.
want.
Yeah. Yeah.
And from guiding time. One thing that's talked about is about physical touch and
Mm-hmm.
navigating boundaries around physical touch.
Yep.
And I'm a big advocate that even if you plan on not touching the person and them not touching you, you should have the conversation about touch,
Mm-hmm.
right? And our culture, at least in the West, is not very good about navigating boundaries in general, let alone consent boundaries, let alone physical ones. And so that alone can be a good rapport builder and relationship builder. But in this particular case, I'm thinking of, I was going through talking about what our touch boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
and I would demonstrate them, like, okay, so hand on hand, and then they're like, okay, it'd be like this,
Uh-huh.
right? And like, and then if it was like, and then just even having this brief conversation about, and physically demonstrating it, and then like hand on shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
hand on head, hand on feet. And she's like, wow, I didn't realize that this was part of the conversation. My daughter had experienced ketamine
Mm-hmm.
in a legal situation
Right.
and experienced harm
Mm-hmm.
because those conversations didn't happen. And she was touched in ways that would be within the confines of things that would be considered acceptable, allowable touch.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a hand on her feet and hand on shoulder.
Uh-huh.
Um, and because of the harm she experienced in state, because it was unexpected touch and she had
Uh-huh.
a history of harm,
Uh-huh.
that she withdrew from all therapy and all treatment, and it was her daughter. And because I had done that demonstration for her, she realized that that would have made a difference for her daughter. It was healing for her in that moment, and she knew that she could have a different conversation with her daughter to let her know that that wasn't necessarily how it could have been done. It could have been done differently.
Right.
And it offered the opportunity for healing for not just the mom, but also for the daughter.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, for me, talking about things that can be uncomfortable for people and being willing to have uncomfortable conversations that are important are healing, not just for the person, but also for other people in their lives. And we need to appreciate the web of relationships that we're in, including with ourselves. Back to the example of when the harm for the student happened that brought me more active in the space. She didn't know that I had had experience of harm in state, right? And it brought up those things for me to heal with in shadow. I'm grateful I was able to hold the space and help me to see it in a way. And I know that called me into the space even more so because of having had that history.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that psychedelics and working with psychedelic ethics, even if you don't like that word, think about it as, meaning, purpose, spirit, the divine feminine and care. And the divine feminine is associated with shadow, the mystery, the moon. I think as we embrace more of our shadow, of our feminine, of being empowered as women, however you define yourselves, you don't have to be a body of a female by birth or identification to be feminine. We all have those parts. But I think we're, through the psychedelic work and through the space and coming in better relationship, we're embracing not just ourselves, but also healing the wound of the feminine within all of us and in relationship.
And that is pretty much the intention of this podcast. So that was beautifully put. Thank you.
I think it's so beautiful. Yeah, I'm so grateful. And I'm so grateful for you and for this podcast and anyone you have on here for having these conversations about that, because bringing that to light literally is not just a beautiful thing, but it's a very healing thing. And I think it's very necessary, even if people, don't always feel comfortable talking about it.
Exactly. And so thank you for providing and creating a space where these conversations can happen. And so on EPIC's website, there are so many good resources I want to draw attention to, such as a psychedelic practitioner code of conduct, and considerations on touch and a psychedelic practice, and psychedelic online community guidelines, and psychedelic safety flags, which is a really important resource. And so EPIC made the decision to have these as living documents, which means that people can comment on them.
Yes.
So tell us about the group process for creating these resources, and then why make them open source that way?
Well, open source, I mean, having come from the Silicon Valley.
Okay, yes, all right.
And tech.
Okay.
No, but I mean, I can't say that it's definitely affected my mindset on what it means to have information that's closed or open, and the value of having an open cycles, as it were, to allow people to give feedback and contribute, right? That it doesn't belong to any one of us, it belongs to everyone. And especially if it's an important, potentially life-saving resource, I feel like having access is really important. But also in terms of, ethics, if we really want it to be a more international community working towards these things, we need to involve the community and realize that, if we're trying to, and I'm not saying that we're going to come up with one, I'm not in the mindset at all, like one rule to rule them all or anything like that, like, oh, Lord of the Rings.
No, there was a lot of rules on these to rule them all.
Well, I mean, some of them, these are things that have been, some of these were, in terms of the process, like some of them were created by other communities, right? And then we ended up stewarding them and co-stewarding them and helping them to live on.
Yeah.
For example, psychedelic safety flags. Originally, and it came out of Leah Friedman, who worked on Psychedelic Survivors, which was an organization that existed. It is no longer around, but they provided survivor support. And they've provided survivor support groups. And part of outreach of their work and their advocacy and supporting people, they started creating psychedelic safety flags that I was called to be a part of, as well as many others in the community. And in terms of that process, that involved, a certain core group of people who thought could help inform and create it. It was actually based on a document from the BDSM community, and changed because it was something that they found supportive in their community. So we're like, I mean, Leah would have to talk about that story, because I'm not the origin of that story.
Right.
I'm the co-steward with her on maintaining it. So in terms of like after she co-created it with other people, I offered it as a place where we could have it and have access. And, if you want to know who owns the domain, I own the domain for the psychedelic safety flags, but like, it's like, it's held loosely with the idea that everyone can contribute. Something else like the code of conduct that you mentioned, that originally came together by Liam in the United Kingdom. And he was working with the Mind Foundation members at the time, for this is what I understand as far as what he tells me of the backstory, that facilitators were trying to create a community with facilitator standards, and they worked for a long time to create this essential code that everyone could work on in many, many hours, and then it didn't end up coming together.
Yeah.
And wanted to preserve that for the community and provide access to the wisdom that was found from that collaboration in Europe. So that was a European collaboration that we then brought in to be able to be accessible for people, that we have permission from Liam, and Liam is the main steward for that, right? And so we also hold that. Other things that, like the touch one, that's one of the ones that I helped steward more. But Sue's, who's main steward of that document, did most of the work on that. And that one, we brought together, some key people who we thought had experience and knowledge and expertise, somatic therapists, people who did work with touch more deeply, had deeper training around it, could help bring together information and resources together in community as a service, knowing that none of us are being paid, right? None of this work was paid for. Like, as far as I know, no one was paid for any of the work involved with any of these things, which I think is also a problem. Right? Because I'm literally faced with the reality of the fact that I'm trying to, with the Epic team, trying to keep on holding space for these collaborations, but we do not have adequate funding to be able to continue existing.
Right.
Right? And that's a real reality. But I feel like it's served a lot of people, and it belongs to the community, and we want to keep it alive for the community.
I think it's a really important resource for both participants and practitioners, and that's what's rare about it. Is that it's I really encourage anybody who is a psychedelic practitioner to go and look at the practitioner code of conduct, and also the psychedelic safety flags. Is just take a good hard look and be like, oh wow, I might need to raise some of my standards in some of these places. I think it's a really in-depth resource that you guys have provided, and I will be, I want to make sure that people are it'll be in the show notes, but I mean, I've spent a lot of time on it myself, looking at it, and I think you present a beautiful high bar. And I don't think that everybody will meet the bar, and that's okay.
That is totally okay. I would expect no one to reach the high bar.
It's
by
a
the way.
very
No
high bar
perfect is
to
toxic,
right.
everyone.
So we will
does
say
not
that.
mean perfect.
Right. But to even start to have the place to even start thinking about that level of bar, that has not existed in one place before. So I really want to honor everybody who has done that work.
Yeah, especially
because
she deserves most of the credit. I want to give
yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's and we're looking now to like translate it and other things like that to try and make it even more accessible. And we're saying there's a green flags in there too. It's not just red flag,
Right.
yellow, orange. And I think there's, and even if you think about the code, right? It's just like, well, what are some of the base things that we kind of generally agree upon are good practices? Even if, and it was actually that code that actually inspired the touch document. Because if you see, there's a note in this, it's like, oh, we needed a touch. And I'm like, oh, okay, there's no conversation about it in here at all. It's like, okay, we need something different, right? But I was also going to tell you that I've had stories that have come out of that psychedelic safety flags document in particular. People who, even when they've like left communities, for example, one of the surprises for me involving that document was someone bringing that document to me in terms of ethics support and saying like, I use these parts of the flags to show to my community where they were causing harm and where they had room for growth. And they made notes and they shared it with their community. And then they're bringing it to me to say like, thank you for having this, and making it available. Because now it was even clearer for them to understand where their experiences were and where that areas of growth were. Right. And in her case, she was trying to help her community. She ended up leaving it because they didn't respond well in terms of her, but being able to have the specificity to understand and the clarity is so
and an external resource, not just an inner complaint. Yeah. That's
Yeah. And none of this is coming from a place of judgment. We're saying, and I think sometimes that's the misunderstanding. I mean, Epic has had a policy of not doing canceling and not calling people out or even calling people in for that matter, for the most part, because with the idea that everyone is making their own decision and it's their decision, not ours. And having a boundary around that has helped us to be supportive for people in a way that helps us to set that boundary, to realize like, this is your decision. It's not ours. We're here to just help inform you, to help support you and empower your decision making, and open to other ideas and collaboration. So anyone can come with a collaboration and share it. And, we do have to feel like we're in alignment, but all of them are Creative Commons license. So the only restriction is to give credit for where you got the information and to not use it in corporate business, like as a sale, like, you can't like make it your sale funnel, basically. So you can use it as much as you want. You can represent, you can make it even more readable for people. Like, there's actually one on the Epic. We don't have much posted on the Epic Instagram or anything like that. We just have one post right now, which it just has like someone else's post on the psychedelic safety flags, and they did it and put in a simple phone. I'm like, well, that's nice. Like, okay, yeah, sure, you can. We'll happy to let you tag us on. So actually help other people. Use the resource, share it. Talk about it, teach it. We want it to get out there.
I want it to get out there, so I'm honoring what it took to create it, and
Thank
it's
you.
so it's going to be so critical as psychedelics become more and more mainstreamed. So I'm really grateful for all of that in-depth work that you guys did. Sandra, thank you for bringing so much depth and honesty and wisdom to this conversation. What I love most is how your story reminds us that psychedelics aren't just about personal transformation. They're about the responsibility we carry and how to share, guide, and engage with them ethically.
It's so
So,
true. And because
yeah,
at the end of the day, right, where do you want to be at the end of of any journey or any experience? You want to live well,
yeah,
prosper fairly,
live
all the
well,
things,
right? And the medicine isn't just the time on the mat. It's
It
how
is
we
not.
carry ourselves, how we care for one another, and how we honor the path that it shows us with integrity. So, thank you
Yeah.
for providing some clear boundaries and guidelines for that process.
Well, thank you for being a part of it. I'm so grateful for you for having this show. I know I've already said that, but also even in terms of our conversations on Clubhouse.
Hmm.
That was before Epic was formed. And a lot of the seeds of the conversations of what ended up forming Epic were there in those conversations. And
Oh,
I know
that's
you're
great.
definitely a part of that. So thank
That's
you
wonderful.
for being part of the community that helped
Oh,
put
my pleasure. Sandra, how can listeners learn more about you?
You can go to my website, which is sandradreisbach.com, or you can check me out. Check me out. Check me out. I know. You can check out the Psychedelic Source podcast, everywhere your podcasts are available. I'm starting to kind of resurrect do more of my own YouTube, which is Dr. Sandra Dreisbach, but there's mainly posts in there right now. But you can also check out the Psychedelic Source podcast on YouTube there.
All right, great. All right, I recommend that, people. And all that will be in the show notes as well. So thank you, Sandra, and thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like to stay connected, I invite you to sign up for my newsletter at psychedelicdivas.com. And of course, in return, you will get my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. And you can also find me on Instagram at Psychedelic Divas. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Sandra. And I just so appreciate your kind and loving feedback. It has really meant a lot to me. Thanks for being part of this journey. I look forward to growing together.
Same.